Hello, ice cream assassins and squires of dimness. I'm Joey.
Hello, I'm Matt.
I'm Kristen.
And welcome to Messing with the Master, a podcast where three lifelong Tori Amos fans reflect on the iconic singer-songwriter's catalog by thoughtfully and intentionally reorganizing each album into fresh playlists that explore Tori's musical legacy, as well as our own interconnected personal narratives and friendship, which began with a shared passion for Tori's music over 20 years ago. This week, we are diving for shells with our nautical nuns and reflecting on the absolute masterpiece that is from the Choirgirl Hotel, Tori's 1998 record that marked the first time she recorded live in studio with other musicians, Matt Chamberlain on drums, Justin Meldal Johnson and George Porter Jr. on bass, and Steve Caton on guitars, and programming by Andy Gray, among others. This, of course, also meant that it was her first world tour with a full band, which, if you were a member of the then especially rabid Tori Amos online fan community, you may recall, was met with a tremendous amount of skepticism, even fatalism, by those worried that she was betraying her girl and the piano roots. Those fears were quickly allayed, however, when we all saw and heard the brilliant evolution of Tori's sound the band helped her to achieve. Choirgirl swings from wildly experimental to comfortingly familiar, sometimes within a single song. And it's a record that one can make a very strong argument for being her very best. So, lover, brother Bougainvillea, join us as we venture to the other side of the galaxy. This is Messing with the Master from the Choirgirl Hotel. Hi, guys.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Look at us with our new microphones, all in unison, just like the Piotr's.
It feels no comment.
Whoa.
We're gonna save that for that episode. Great intro.
Thank you.
And
there was a lot to pull from.
I think that you bring up, something that we've continually talked about, a thread that we've sort of had running through each of these episodes, and that is, it seems like every time Tori Amos puts out a record, her fan base has some sort of very strong opinion or reaction to it, which is great. I mean, to be an artist and to be able to get reactions from that many people with your art is a really amazing thing. But I always feel like it makes sense. You know, I remember when Choirgirl came out, yes, I was absolutely floored when I heard Spark on my crappy car stereo and the piece of garbage car I was driving in Michigan on 88.7, which was the alternative radio station. I had to pull the car over. You know, you hear the story about Dolly Parton pulling the car over when she heard Whitney Houston's version of I Will Always Love You. I always was like, well, that's just a really stupid PR tidbit. But I actually did that. I pulled over on Michigan Avenue in Dearborn, Michigan, when I heard that song on the radio, and it shocked me. But I thought, okay, I really could see her going in that direction.
Yeah. It's funny because in retrospect, I mean, I think we all remember different versions of this, how people were just so despondent and so beside themselves over the news that she would be playing with a band. And it never quite made sense because, I mean, I guess we didn't know quite what it meant. I think some people were afraid, does this mean she's not really going to play the piano anymore? Like there was a confusion about what it meant for her to have a band, right? But it never quite made sense to me even in the moment because I was like, well, almost every song on every album has guitars, has drums, right? Pele maybe had fewer songs with some of that production, but it didn't seem all that strange. But people were we were collectively feeding each other's fears about what this meant, right? And we had just had Siren on the Great Expectations soundtrack, so I think everybody was like, oh no, she's moving further and further away from, like we're never gonna get like a solo Tori song again, or or she's never gonna tour again by herself. Like there was all this sort of absolutism, right? Like this is a definitive change of some kind, and I don't know what sort of fuels that, and I can't quite put myself back into 26 years ago to remember what it was that was making everybody so panicked. But then we heard Spark and we saw the incredible video, and, you know, you could hear the piano, you could hear keyboards, like so what were we afraid of? You know, that was the big question.
I've thought about this a little bit, and I will take a stab at a theory that, you know, Tori presented herself as a woman with a piano very fearlessly across the world. That's the iconic image that we all grew to know and become familiar with and become intimately related to, and that we saw ourselves, a piece of ourselves in. And I think for a lot of us who really had our lives really changed for the better by listening to those first couple of albums, I think even though they're heavily instrumented, maybe people saw, you know, maybe people who were discovering their identity through those first couple of albums and that girl with a piano archetype maybe were afraid of losing that identity so quickly, or maybe not wanting to shed that skin so quickly. That's what I thought about.
I think what you said, Joey, was true for me. I really thought that she would just never play the piano again solo, which is ridiculous. And, you know, and I think hearing the B-sides, like, not only was that not true, they were stunning, haunting, beautiful, like just her and a piano.
Right.
But I think change is hard, you know, and I think, Matt, everything you said as well, like, I think a lot of us, you know, identify with Tori, like, we we look up to her, all these things, and she had been so fiercely independent. And I think especially after Boys for Pele, where we already thought she was like this independent powerhouse, and we're like, wow, she's even more. She's gone to the extreme. And then she goes out and says that she's lonely and she wants to play with a band, and you're like, what, girl? Like, you're not lonely. You're Tori Amos. Right. And so I think that at the height of that fame, that change was a lot. And it's funny, I was thinking back on, like, how did I feel about this? I was stressed by the concept, and then hearing Spark, I was like, oh, okay, she's incredible. It's all good.
Right. And maybe some of that anxiety carried over because of, like, what you're saying, Kristen, that the live performances were so intimate. Even when she had Steve Caton with her for the Do Drop In tour, there was still just this, like, extreme intimacy, this extreme, like, brilliant, like, feral thing on stage who was doing everything by herself. And I think that a lot of people didn't want to let go of this idea of her doing it by herself. She had just produced Pele by herself, and so I think there was just this, like, again, this, like, notion of, like, Tori by herself, and the announcement that she would be doing something different and inviting other people on stage, I think really rattled people, you know, also because we couldn't quite visualize what it meant, which is really funny in retrospect, because it's like, oh, she just meant a band, like a drummer, a bassist, and a guitarist, you know what I mean? Like, but I don't know what it was we collectively all thought was going to happen, you know, and then to have it be so sort of startlingly traditional in a lot of ways was a big surprise. But then what she achieved live sonically with that band over that tour and the next tour and then going on to the future, of course, just became, like, sort of second nature. Like, oh yeah, of course Tori is now going to, you know, change horses into this strange edited band, you know, synthesizer with a new melody and a new arrangement. And, like, of course Father Lucifer is going to become this strange electronic tribal mesh, you know, mashup. You know, so suddenly we shifted suddenly, and then we're suddenly always expecting, like, oh yeah, she's gonna reinvent things with the band from now on, right? So, like, we went with her pretty quickly, but the build up, part of it too is because the idea of an artist going away for a few years, Tori's really maintained that even now. She really does kind of just, like, disappear, and we don't really, you know, most of us don't really hear from her or talk to her. But especially then, like the internet was still sort of in its infancy. You know, I was still like in high school, like going on web crawler, typing in Tori Amos, like during my computer class and printing out photos of her. You know what I mean? Like that's what the internet was. And like, there wasn't much to it, even though she sort of pioneered, you know, we'll talk more about it with Boys for Pele, but you know, A Call to Light Sneeze being kind of the first like streaming single on any website ever. That was a big deal, or rather I should say major record label streaming a single on a website, right? And so I don't know, there was just this like the imagination well was so huge, and we only had a few cryptic statements from her, you know, during that time. And I don't know, I think that Choirgirl both it calmed people down, but also really energized everybody and was like, whoa, we didn't know what she was going to do next. And then she does this, and you couldn't even like imagine what that transition was going to be and what that evolution was going to be. And she really knocked our socks off with, you know, 12 incredible songs, and a bunch of B-sides and an incredible world tour. And, you know, it sort of kicked off a new, I don't want to say new era necessarily, but like, because it wasn't just the time period, it was like a new, maybe energy is the right word. It was a new energy. It was a new Tori in so many ways. It was still her, but it was a new version of her that was sort of, I don't know, like she changed. When we talked about this last time, but she changes so much between albums, and the change between 96 and 98 was just really, really noteworthy, right?
I think it was like a chapter. Like I wouldn't call it an era, but it was a new chapter.
Yeah.
And I think that was palpable and exciting. I mean, you know, she came out with like this darker hair. She, you know, like the whole look was different. She was married. It was all these things. All these things were new and different. And yeah, we didn't even have Google alerts then. So it was just you type it in to Ask Jeeves, Tori Amos. No fucking news. Nothing new. Right. It's just on the dent. Refresh.
Checking mtvnews.com or whatever it was to see if in the little sidebar there'd be like a little picture with some sort of information about her, right?
Well, you know, something you bring up, you know, talking about this chapter is this really, for me, this album was the one where I was like, okay, this is the album where I'm going to be able to play this one for all of my friends and they're going to really like it. Yeah. And that was exciting for me. That sort of not mainstreaming of Tori Amos, because I mean, this is not I don't think this is a mainstream record per se, but it was really in line with, we talked about the zeitgeist in our last episode, and she really tuned into that frequency in a way that it put her in the company of her peers, where she, you know, rightfully belongs. You know, she was mentioned in, you know, all of the various articles being written about the most important musicians of that time, alongside Bjork, alongside Radiohead, alongside PJ Harvey, alongside Beck, many of whom all put out albums in that year. You know, 98 to me is one of those quintessential music years. You know, in addition to those, you also had bands like Air, Outkast, Lauryn Hill, Miseducation of Lauryn Hill. It was a really like robust time for good music and albums. So to me, this was the one where I was like, okay, this is like from beginning to end as a statement, as an album, individually as songs. I'm not going to be embarrassed to play this for, you know, at the time I was living in Michigan, and there was kind of where I lived, because the Detroit area is such a musical city. It was right at the cusp at the end of a really hardcore electronica era in Detroit, so a lot of house and a lot of electronic production coming into the forefront in mainstream culture, but also at the same time rock and roll was really on the rise in Michigan, and that's like the White Stripes and the, you know, garage bands of Detroit that were coming up at that time. Right. So this album really hit that nexus, you know, that space in between where she was experimenting with the electronica, where she was playing hardcore rock and roll, And it kind of, I thought, captured the attention of lots of different kinds of audiences, or it could. It had the potential to. So for me, I had a lot of friends who were, straight guys in Detroit rock and roll bands out drinking PBRs all night. And I could play them a song or two off of there, whereas before, they liked to, mock some of the other stuff. But this, they were like, oh, okay, this woman is a serious musician.
I feel like it made vulnerability cool, maybe. Like it didn't have to be weird. It was like you could put a beat behind it and some electronica. I don't know. I remember making a lot of mixtapes for friends and then kind of layering in some of that earlier work so they could see how different she was, how versatile she was, and then maybe get into some of that other type of music or the other Tori if they liked this, which a lot of people did.
Yeah. I concur with everything you both just said. I think that that was all true. It's also kind of a shame because it's wonderful that Choirgirl came out during, a time when there were all these incredible albums, but I think as a result it got lost a little bit. I always feel like it was, this was like her first, like, she had her Rolling Stone cover. She had an amazing review in Rolling Stone. There was really just this amazing, like, press behind her, and she was getting a lot of accolades for, rightly so, for producing this really, for Tori Amos to sort of meet the moment, right? I think that the hallmark of the previous three albums was that Tori was sort of imposing on the moment or something. She was disrupting things. Because she just didn't sound like anybody else. And Choirgirl still sounds like uniquely Tori Amos, but it was kind of like the first time where she sort of like, and maybe the only time that she sort of like slid in to what was going on, whether that was on purpose or just, because that's where she was and the energy was and the people she was working with were guiding her in that way. It wasn't too shabby to have Matt Chamberlain be her first, like, full-time drummer in her life, right? And I think that she was listening to the people around her and absorbing influences and, like she says, playing with buttons and, figuring out what stuff could happen. And that was really exciting. We'll get more into it, but I think that it's also really worth noting that the electronica sounds on Choirgirl don't sound dated at all. They sound like really threaded into the fabric of the Tori Amos sound, as opposed to her sort of borrowing from something that would be dated. And that I think we can point to a lot of albums in the 90s that sort of, were of a moment but don't really sound like they could be made now. And I think Choirgirl could mostly be made now 6 years later. The other thing I do want to say is that we talked about this a lot, Kristen. It's also Tori's entry in this really interesting thing that happens when female musicians write about motherhood. And we had Madonna's Ray of Light, we had Liz Phair's White Chocolate Space Egg, and both electronica tinged, right? I mean, Ray of Light more so than Liz Phair's album. And then you have Tori's entry, which is about not being a mother, right? It's about miscarriage. It's about yearning for something that she didn't know she wanted, and then only knew she really wanted it when it was taken from her, and sort of going down to the underworld to figure out what this means, right? And so it's interesting that her entry is this, it doesn't quite match up to those other albums in terms of like what they're celebrating versus what she is reckoning with and what she is trying to, the wound that she's trying to suture, and then of course a few years later Bjork has Vespertine, right? And so we have this sort of interesting series of albums by these musicians who are all peers in different ways. But, though Madonna, at least with Ray of Light, I think sort of brought herself to the Tori, the Bjork, the Liz Phair in a way that I think none of those musicians could sort of comfortably sit in dialogue with her. But Ray of Light, like, you know, Tori talked about loving Frozen, right? So we know that she was listening to that record, and I think that there was definitely some sort of influence there. And I mean that in the most complimentary ways. Not, you know, there's nothing that sounds like Ray of Light, but you know what I mean? Like, she's in conversation with those records in a way that I think is really, really compelling. So that's always been sort of on my mind since back then, that she was putting herself into conversations with these other records and these other musicians. But of course it's Tori, and of course, you know, they're all talking in one direction and she's sort of talking in this other direction because, you know, her mind just goes in different, you know, through different trajectories than the others, right? And the music reflects that, because the music is both traditionally composed in some ways and then sort of off the wall in terms of the sounds and the decisions and the production. And of course, you know, she's still Tori, and she lyrically is doing the most interesting, you know, of that whole crew. She of course has the most interesting vocabulary and imagery palette, right?
That's why we're messing with that master and not the other masters. Although I do love Ray of Light, of course.
Ray of Light's amazing. Ray of Light's
we could do
incredible.
a Ray of Light messing with the master someday. You know, messing with the master is, you know, we know who the master is, but there are other masters that we could mess with. Not saying we want to. Not saying we want to. Maybe a special edition.
We're not going to. Mm-mm.
Okay. Yeah. No.
Yeah. This album is just so rich, and there's so much to say about it. And I said in the intro that I think one could argue for this being her very best. And I know we're sort of always like a bit hesitant to call anything, you know, her very best, but I don't know. It's a pretty strong contender. It's
this is my favorite record. I'm going to say it up top.
Something special.
It's my favorite record. It's, I think, her best record. I have a really it's just, to me, the strongest artistic statement that says Tori Amos to me. And it's simply because it hit me when I started I've always loved music, but when I really started taking music seriously in those years and all of that good music was coming out, she was the one that stood above it all with this record. You know, so to me this record is gold.
This was an incredible time to be a Tori Amos fan. It was just like fervent, and the music was so amazing. And the image, like the art, everything about it, the tour, it was so fun. It felt like a frenzy. Joey, is this your favorite album too? Like, I know I can't call anything my favorite.
I think I've said that I think Under the Pink is my favorite, and I think it's her best in a lot of ways, but I don't know, but I think Choirgirl might share the title. It's really hard because they're very different. And also I want to ask you all, before we get into sort of talking about, you know, first experiences with the record, how do you feel about it as the next step from Boys for Pele? Like, does it feel logical? Does it feel like there were theoretical albums, like, sort of imagined and scrapped in between to get to Choirgirl? We know that she was working on a vampire album after Boys for Pele that never surfaced.
I feel like that's means. Hotel. I feel like that's Hotel, right?
Or Give, you know, 13 years later, right? Like, but she was apparently going to go like research like Vlad the Impaler. She was like going for it, and then she didn't do it. But I don't know. So what do you think? Like, how does it I don't know what I'm trying to say. Like, how does it follow Pele, or how does it feel like transition wise? Like, does it make sense, or does it, you know, what do you think about it as the fourth record after something as sort of epic and strange and unusual, and, you know, I
think for me it's always made a lot of sense because Pele is such a strong statement, right? it's just a really big record. You can't follow a record like Pele with some, pardon the expression, some limp dick record. You know, like you really need to have a boner with this record, and this record achieves that erection. Here I am talking about this instead of you guys this week, but you understand.
We
what
would
I'm
never
saying.
be that crude.
crass.
Anyway, go ahead.
Never
I'm
talk
sorry.
about limp dick.
I'm just white trash from Michigan. I'm sorry. So you know, again, to bring it back to film, because that's how I relate to everything, including Tori. I have always sort of seen Tori as an auteur, like like a great filmmaker, and great filmmakers can make all different kinds of styles of records. They're, you know, capable of different genres. They're capable of different atmosphere. And to me, the important part is it's always distinctly Tori Amos. She always has that mark of her auteurship on each record. So in that sense, I think that Choirgirl really does make sense as a follow-up, because it does take all of the elements that we've come to love about Tori, the fearlessness, the lyrical audaciousness, the unexpectedness, the changes within the songs. All of that stuff is there. It's always been there up until that point too. And I think it does make sense in terms of the size of it. In terms of the size of the sound, right? There are certain signatures that I think you can trace in there. There's kind of this like galloping production sound that she's, you know, dabbled in from the beginning, and I think it really is one of her signature sounds at this point. You can hear it on Scarlet. I know you can hear it on songs like IIE on this record, and in that sense, she does have those like identifying signatures that have it that make it make sense from one record to the next. The same way that a director might use a certain kind of lens or a certain kind of type of photography, right?
Yeah. I something that I want to also say about Choirgirl, from, you know, the music to the artwork to the tour and the way in which the tour evolved, the structure of it, the reinventions of older songs, and sort of the you know, famously or infamously, she turned down Lilith Fair, right? And she, being a cocky, you know, woman in her early 30s who was producing her own music and was doing this really cool thing, she was, you know, basically saying, I don't want to like go hang out with a bunch of women and play 4 songs a night because everybody has to share. That's great for women who need it. I don't need it. She was being arrogant in the best of ways, I think, and saying, I'm gonna put my money where my mouth is. I'm gonna give you a real rock show, right? I'm gonna give you like a real. And so Choirgirl, and I think I would say Choirgirl and then Night of Hunters, hear me out, are the 2 times the 2 times that I can think of where she most successfully conceptualized an era and what the music from the album to the stage would feel like, and challenged herself really, really hard and really, really succeeded. I mean, she's always incredible live, but those 2 occasions, you know, a band for the first time.
ADP too.
Sure. ADP in terms of the, you know, Ziggy Stardust kind of, you know, glam rock thing. But in terms of like her first time with a band and saying, I'm not just, you know, going to be using them for some light, you know, like accompaniment on, you know, some songs. No, the opposite. It's going to be 2 songs a night solo, and the rest of the night is with my band. And then when you get to Night of Hunters, it was like, no, I'm going to have this quartet on stage with me the whole time, and we're going to play, right, this music the way it's intended to be heard, and we're going to throw in some older songs and reinvent. So this is all to say that I think that Choirgirl, you know, is what makes it so incredible, is that when we talk about context, right? I had said on a Native Invader episode that part of the issue was that Tori didn't really tour those songs from the album, and therefore was never able to contextualize what the music meant within the larger catalog. The opposite is true for Choirgirl. She toured that record in a way to say, hey, this is a new style for me. This is something new that I'm doing, but look at how it fits into what you already know about me and the journey that you've been on with me. And so that's when I think of the notion of contextualizing music on tour, it goes back really to Choirgirl. Like, that's what I mean. Like, she was not only playing all those songs from the record, but also taking that sound and that approach and applying it to all of these older songs, majority of which had never been played with other musicians before, right? So that's why I think it's just so extra badass and so memorable, and we feel it, right? We sort of get transported back to that time when it was an incredible time to be a Tori fan. It was a frustrating time to be a Tori fan because, like, I waited hours and hours and hours for that club show, and I was too young to get in, but had done all the work to make sure that, like, with my dad coming to buy me a ticket, and it was a mess. And of course I couldn't get in, I couldn't get a ticket, and it was, super high stress. And the next show was, MSG. And it was enormous, and my seat was a million miles away, and it was just so chaotic and so stressful. And then I didn't get any Tori again until the end of November when she was wrapping up her tour, and then I was fifth row center in a tiny, tiny little theater in New Jersey, right? So you go through this, like, it was just such an incredible span of time when the access to her was so limited, and you're following along on the Dent, and you're seeing clips and hearing shitty bootlegs. And I mean, that's all part of the piece, right? Like, it's all part of that same network of nostalgia, but also like a very real thing in music that I don't know that people get to experience now in the same way because of how things have changed. But there was a mystery, and there was an edging, and then a release that happened over that year, right?
What's wrong with you guys?
Come on, stop.
Oh my God.
Oh, stop.
Okay.
You know what I mean, though?
Yes, all that's changed. I will say, I think that's why Beyonce does her midnight drops, and she tries to keep things as exciting as you can in an age where you can get news all the time, and even like within leaked news, you can kind of tell what's credible, or you can kind of tell what's not credible. So I definitely think people are out there trying to keep it spicy, but yeah, I mean, it's
hard to.
There's so hard, yeah. So props to Bey for that, for sure. But who's working that hard other than Beyonce? Not me.
Billie Eilish just caused some controversy because she posted for Rolling Stone to go fuck themselves because they leaked her track listing to her new album, which was really funny to me because, like,
isn't that who you would want to run it?
Right, and also, like, it's not the album, it's just the song titles, and I'm sure your fans were like falling over themselves with excitement to imagine, because we did that. We got song titles. What does this mean? What the fuck is I-E-E-E? What does that mean? What is that? How do you say that?
And remember when we would guess what, like, a song would sound like?
Yes.
I remember very...
Threads and threads of it, yeah.
Oh, my God. Remember when The Beekeeper came out, and I was like, I'm most excited to hear Ribbons Undone. It sounds like it'll be...
really powerful. Yeah.
And yet you cut it from your playlist.
Well, but she was imagining a different version of it.
Right.
Well, can I ask one other question? Why are we talking about the Beekeeper again?
Sorry, Matt, go ahead. What are you going to say?
I just said, why are we talking about the Beekeeper again?
Okay, sorry.
That was a great record. That was a great episode. And all right. But one last thing I have to say is, do you remember, everybody, before we really dive in, that initially, I think it was MTV, Kurt Loder said that the album was called Confessionings of a Choir Girl.
Confessionings of a Choir Girl.
Confessionings of a Choir Girl. And that's what we all thought was the album title for a good amount of time until it was corrected as From the Choirgirl Hotel. And then there was debate on the forums. People were like, Confessionings was so interesting. From the Choirgirl Hotel sounds so bland. People were so... So upset that the Confessionings title was not true. That's what
Do
we're
we
doing
have
with people.
that? Do we have yeah, right. Do we have that on YouTube? I can't remember if there's like an actual clip live of that. But I do remember, of course,
Of the
drama.
Confessionings?
Yeah.
If we can find it, let's post it to
We'll
social.
ask
It was like
Saker.
an MTV News. It was like an MTV News brief thing. Remember when like the
Yeah.
globe,
Oh,
the
yeah.
planet would
That-
spin? Yeah.
Yeah. I remember.
All right. So, Matthew, where were you when you first heard the whole record? Do you remember?
Right. Vividly. This was a all-timer experience. So I lived in Michigan at the time, in Dearborn, which is a really interesting place in Michigan, home of the Ford Motor Company, and also home of one of the largest populations of Middle Eastern people outside of the Middle East, right outside of Detroit. So I was with my friend Brianne, who politely tolerated my Tori listening and, occasionally could get into it, but we were always together. And there was a record store at Michigan and Schaefer. I want to say it was called Michigan Records. I'm not sure of the name of the store, but it was at Michigan Avenue and Schaefer in Dearborn, Michigan. They were having a midnight sale. It was one of those record shops where you could go in and you could buy the bootlegs. They had all the weird videos, and they had all of the, special things that I couldn't really afford on my waiter's salary at the time. So we wrapped a blunt, which was a big special treat back in those days. You couldn't just go to the corner store and buy it legally. You had to go to the weed spot, drive through, buy a nickel bag, and find somebody who knew how to do it, which I don't. So
Just like in Texas still.
we smoked a blunt and went into we were in line outside for probably about an hour, and Brianne was really, annoyed that we got there an hour early, but I was like, we're getting there an hour early. And we were, right in the front of the line, luckily. But there were a lot of people there. And I remember we walked in, they let us in, and they were playing the record on their speakers in the store. And I just kept thinking, oh, no. Let me buy this record and get it home to listen to it in private. I don't want to listen to it for the first time in this record store. But by the time I had my copy of the record, I was in line. There were lots of people in front of me. So I started hearing the other tracks. So I had heard Spark, obviously, a lot. And then I heard Cruel. And I was just like, oh, my God. That one, I couldn't believe. I was not anticipating that one. Then Black Dove, then we got up to Jackie's Strength before we got out of the store. So I heard the first part in the store, high as fuck, with my friend who was really grumpy about the whole thing.
Yeah.
And then we went back to my place, which was walking distance, and listened to the rest. And that album just became the soundtrack for my life at that time. I listened to it all the time. I played it for anybody who would listen. But I'll always remember that night at the record store in Dearborn, Michigan. It was really special. And my friend, unfortunately, is no longer with us, so it's nice to be able to remember her and having that really nice moment that's attached to the memories of this record. Kristen, how about you? Where were you?
Well, as you know, I'm from Texas, and it was Cinco de Mayo, and so nobody wanted to take me to the fucking record store to get the record.
Everybody was drunk.
And and everybody treated me like I was a fucking problem because I needed to go get this album day up. If I recall correctly, it was like a school. I mean, it was Tuesday, right? It's always Tuesday. So it's a cool day. I needed to go after school. Somebody was annoyed. Somebody's mom took us to, I think, Tower Records, and they were playing the album. People are like in the store. There's posters. There wasn't a line like there was at yours. It was definitely busy, but I was in and out. And I remember my friend that I was in the car with wanted to put it on in the car, and I was like, no, like I need to be seated. I need to be like, I can't be with your mom. Yeah, I can't be with your mom in the car and we're gonna get out in 10 minutes. Like, what are you talking about? And it was just like, I remember she ended up putting it on, and her mom was like, oh, this sucks, and I was like, oh. But it's fine. I just blocked it out. It's all good. But yeah, it was I just remember everybody being really irritated with me being like,
you're going to need to take me as soon as we're out of school. No ifs, ands, or buts. I need to get to the Tower record. So anyway, what about you, Joseph?
Yeah, a similar situation. After school, Dad, like, we have to go. You have to take me. We have to go. And we, I keep mixing it up. I keep wanting to say that I got it at this little record store called Things from England, that sold bootlegs. It was small, but I didn't actually get it from there. I'm mixing up stories. I got my tickets for the Newark, New Jersey concert at the end of the tour, those fifth row center, from Things from England, because they had a Ticketmaster, computer, and they could print. And so you could go there and get tickets from them. Where I actually got is, I'm pretty sure my dad drove me to the Borders Books and Music at the Garden State Plaza in Paramus, New Jersey, because I remember getting a little poster, a little that famous image of her back with she's holding the piano wire, I guess, or whatever it is, if it's that, I don't know. Which is my least favorite image from the whole record. I can recognize that it's cool, but I was just like, I don't want a shirt with this on it. I don't really like this. You can't see her face. It's like a strange, I love like the abstract, approach to it, but it was always my least favorite. I was like, I want some face, But yeah, I'm pretty sure it was just Borders. I probably got an Italian soda with those like, seltzers with the, syrup in it, and studied the booklet on the drive home. I don't think we listened to it in the car. I think I went home and like went to my room and put it on my ridiculous sound system and sat really close to it. And we had one, my brother and I shared a room, and one of the speakers was busted and would go in and out. So I think for a while I missed certain sounds until I got like a Discman and listened by myself. I know for a fact Venus, the next year, I was listening on that system, and I didn't know there were drums in Josephine because the speaker that the drums were mixed to didn't work. So I had no idea there were drums in Josephine until much later. And I was like, wait a second. So I listened to Choirgirl on that, and it was just totally... I don't know what the feeling is. Shocked, like scared, soothed, like everything in the world, like chills and gasps and, excitement to like get through it, to start it again, like I didn't want to go back and listen to individual songs until I listened to the whole record. And yeah, it was just, and it was a time when there were other people in my life also excited. My sister, my cousin, their friends at school. So like, that coven of older girls in the high school who were into Tori, and it was nice to like be able to share that excitement. And one thing I'll say is that there had been a lot of goodwill about Tori. I think I might have said this on another podcast, I can't remember, but the Great Expectations soundtrack was really popular, and people who had never listened to Tori loved Siren. Like straight dudes like talked about Siren. What a cool song it was. And so I think that for Choirgirl to come out right after, there was a lot of that like similar energy, like they were thinking about her as they would Radiohead or something like that. So there was just a lot of good energy around Tori in that record, and it was a really, really nice time to, it was like one of the few times that somebody could walk past my locker and see, a picture of her and be like, oh cool, Tori, your new album's so awesome. Or like, oh, do you see that video where she's being kidnapped and she's going in the water? Like, man, that's crazy. Like people would stop and talk about it because they would see it was one of the rare moments where she was getting airtime on, on alternative radio, a lot of MTV, and just back to that zeitgeist thing, right? That it was just the right moment. Yeah.
That was a great video though. Like even now, going back and looking at that video, I mean, I'm going to go ahead and, say I do think it's her best video. It's so cinematic. It matches the cinematic nature of the music itself. I think it's really hard to capture that. We've seen, a few times already on the podcast. It's very hard to capture visually what she's saying through her music. And I think that, I don't know that videos always do her music the biggest favors, but this one really, really met the moment.
The Choirgirl era was particularly great for videos. They were the 3 music videos we got were strong. They told stories. They were visually interesting, very different from each other, and but also felt cohesive and part of one larger story. Yeah.
Kristen, did you see any live shows during this tour?
Oh yeah, what'd you see?
I saw this one right here.
Oh,
Tori
but
Amos.
she was just a baby though.
I was just a baby, but
God, how old were you? You were like 15? 14. Oh my God.
And I
no
was
business
very,
going to those shows.
Whatever. Austin Music Hall, RIP, is no longer with us. I couldn't hear for days after. It was packed. It was very stressy. It was one of those things where I was afraid that it was going to be like no under 21, just because that had happened at some shows,
it was happening,
right?
yeah.
Like they didn't always communicate it. It was supposed, like I called several times to make sure it was under 21 was okay. They said it was, but even like I did not feel like it was going to be okay. I remember like walking through the halls, like up the little ramp up into like the place and being like, okay, I'm in, it's okay. And then I go in and it's like a concrete box with like shitty ass sound, and it's just packed people fucking everywhere. I was like, this is not it.
She played some shitty spaces during that tour.
This is not it. It was like an iconic venue, but totally shitty. Shitty sound.
But that was the club tour, yes?
Club, but not during the club tour. Yeah.
Oh, I see. Okay, so it was full plugged tour. Got it.
Yes. Mine was
Yeah.
Yes.
How
real
are your
plugged.
seats? Were you standing room only?
Standing, GA, couldn't see shit. 'Cause
They
I'm
were so
5'1".
tiny, yeah.
Yeah. But it was okay, and then I learned next time that I had to wait all day, and then you could be in front, and it was great, and so I did that. But yeah, it was amazing.
Matt, did you do a club show? Did you get to see the club show? Yeah.
No. So
No.
this is awful, but at that time I mentioned working as a waiter in downtown Detroit. I worked at a restaurant called Pizza Popolis, which was like basically like the Jerry Springer show with deep dish pizza. Fights every night.
You're the most
Insane.
interesting person I've ever met, Matt.
It's a really weird place, and I shout out to Pizza Popolis. I mean, I love those guys. So, and the pizza's really good. But anyway, there was a place called St. Andrew's Hall in Detroit, which is a couple blocks away from Pizza Popolis, and I saw the line forming as I was driving into work at my shift, and I thought really, really strongly. It wasn't sold out, and I thought really strongly about calling in sick and going to the show instead, but I didn't. I went to work. I made a good choice for once in my life to not follow Tori around the country and keep my job. So I went to one show.
What?
No.
I
That was
went
like
to
the one
one-
time you did that.
That was the one time I did it. Yep. That I also did it in '99
He
too,
still
but
regrets it.
for different reasons.
Yeah.
But I went to one show at the Palace of Auburn Hills, which is where the Detroit Pistons, that was their home base for playing ball. And a lot of sports stuff happened there that I don't know much about. But it was a huge concert venue. I saw that's where Madonna did her Ray of Light and Music tour when she did Drowned World. So Madonna played this
cool.
venue. And the seats were nosebleed seats. We got seats the day of. And the seats were terrible. Tori was about this big. It was packed. That was a arena full of people that got their asses handed to them. She really delivered that night. That was, I think, where I was just like, I always have to see what this person is doing live now, because it was just so. It was a little bit of a revelation to see those shows live, honestly, because I at that point loved the music. It meant a lot to me, and
What the
Joey's
fuck?
celebrating me with virtual balloons. Thank you.
How did that happen? What is wrong with this thing?
That's real wonky.
Weird.
I've never seen that. I've seen it on Zoom. Anyway, I'm
Bala-
gonna get a pickle. While
Oh
y'all
my god!
talk, I'm gonna go get a.
Oh my god! It was the Balaloons from from Kakakruel.
Guys,
Wow.
like when she was playing all of these songs live with the band, it just really made a really lasting impression. I mean,
Go get your pickle, Kristen.
I need
Hurry.
a pickle. You can tell I need it. I'll be back.
Go get it. She's listening to us. Go ahead, Matt.
Do you have to go downstairs or are they there? Okay, so I mean, we had Cruel in this set list. We had Precious Things, which with the band in '98 was like a
amazing.
holy shit moment, to open the show, followed by Cruel, which I'm obsessed with that song in general, and then the way it's evolved over the years. But hearing all of that live, then Waitress, of course, which is out of this world, and she did Horses that night, which permanently left a chill down my spine. And also we had Space Dog with Bubbles.
Yeah, the Bubbles. Yeah, she made the right call, switching the opener after the European tour. It was Black Dove January for the club show and Europe, and then she made the switch to Precious Things when she came here, and that was the right thing to do for sure.
Amen.
She made the right choice. We're going to get into Messing with the Master in a second, but I just want to make sure that everybody, we have to put it into the record that, the booklet, the liner notes for Choirgirl have their own alternate track listing, which I think we have to make note of. And so the way the lyrics are arranged in order on the record is Pandora's Aquarium, Liquid Diamonds, Northern Lad, IIE, Spark, Black Dove January, Jackie's Strength, Hotel, She's Your Cocaine, Raspberry Swirl, Cruel, and Playboy Mommy to end the record. There is not, I don't know that anybody's ever found out for sure. My guess is that was the original track listing, and that somebody from the record company was like, hey, you should probably put your single as the first track. That's what we do. You should give it a try. And I think that she probably said okay, but because she's Tori, she had to be like, wait, I have to rearrange the whole thing now. Because if I start with Spark, the rest doesn't work anymore. That's my theory. It's a very simple theory. Some others have argued that because she has said that Pandora was the first song that she wrote for the record, that she's just putting them in the sequence with which she wrote them. And she has said that Jackie's Strength and Hotel had started as one composition, and that original track listing has Jackie and Hotel back to back. So it's possible. So the other theory is that she just put them in that order because there's a map, and because she's, girl loves a map, because she's drawing out the Choirgirl Hotel, and maybe she's putting them in, sequence of how they were written. Either one is a serviceable theory in my view, but we just have to make note of that because it's particularly relevant to the work that we do here. So shall we mess?
Let's mess.
Let's fucking do it.
Matthew has been bragging about his hot track listing for about 2 weeks.
Wow.
So I think you should go first.
Okay. I will clarify.
Let's do it.
I would clarify that it's confidence, but that being said, that being said, I have changed this a lot. I've changed it a lot. I've gone back. I've added. I've subtracted. We say this every episode, but it was actually very difficult. I thought about for a second just keeping it in the order that Tori had it in.
That's not the show.
But that's not the show.
He's threatened us so many times that if we ever did that, he would walk. Yeah. And then this bitch is telling us that he almost did the thing.
Obviously, that is the way. That is the way, okay? Yeah. I'm a purist generally, but that is the way. But that's not the show. Thank you.
That's not the show. So here's my playlist that I
without further ado,
okay, I'm writing down.
I gave you a lot of thought. All right, here we go. We're starting out with IIE.
Oh.
And
I like that. Yeah,
that is I love that song. It's one of my very top Tori favorite songs, top 3 probably for me. I just love it. I have great memories of hearing it. It takes me back to a lot of places that I don't know. They're just they seem like another lifetime ago. But when you hear a song like this, it can just as Joey said earlier, just really plop you back into that moment, and you're feeling all of the same things and experiencing the senses of that time. So that song really does it for me. It really, truly transports me to another place. From there, and also I wanted to open with a track that exemplified the sound of this era, and I do think that the sound of this, it incorporates the lyrics that we love, the beautiful singing, the experimentation. I like that there is just a tiny flourish of piano, so it does it does sort of demarcate the new chapter, right? So I really, and there were versions of this playlist. Again, I do think you could start this particular playlist with any of these tracks and have a valid path forward. So from IAE, I go into Pandora's Aquarium, because the lack of the piano in the first track, I think we need to make up for that with this track and give us a little bit of that organic moment. So because we started with a sacrifice in IIE, I started thinking about the concepts of drowning, and I know that's a little obvious for a water sort of like centric album, but I felt emotionally and lyrically there were a lot of just allusions to drowning. So I really love the soulful, the vibrational low notes that come out at the very beginning of Pandora. Pandora is not a song that I necessarily love all the time. It's an amazing song. I've heard it live a few times. I really love it. But I felt like it really made a lot of sense after the pyrotechnics of the first song to just go with that sort of moment where the fire is snuffed out by the water and you're transported into a different world below. So after that, we go into sorry. That's not where we go.
Cruel?
No, it actually isn't. Oh. Sorry, delete all of that crap.
No way.
Pandora, fuck you. From Pandora, we go into Spark. Again, I wanted to have some real contrast between the tracks. So in previous playlists, I wanted it to sound more continuous, more like a nonstop mix, but this one I really wanted some tension. So after Spark, Liquid Diamonds, which...
Ooh, yes, you are layering this. I love it.
Which I'm into. I'm always into Liquid Diamonds. I think it's a beautiful song. Again, it really exemplifies the sound of the record, lyrically, compositionally. It all really fits concisely within her vision, I think, of what she's doing here. And Liquid Diamonds, it gently folds you in like a wave, and I feel like it by the end overtakes you. So you're pulled under. Like maybe when at the moment where you thought you were gonna be okay, you're just pulled back under the water. So after Liquid Diamonds, I go into Cruel. Again, very top of the favorite Tori songs list for me. I Can Be Cruel. I don't know why. I think that's the realest shit that's ever been spoken on a record. I think that's such a brilliant turn of phrase. I think we can all relate to that. I mean, it's be able to relate to that. I think can be really tough, and to face that in yourself can be really tough. And I love that she put it out there like that. I think that's a strong moment, but also a vulnerable moment. There's also kind of a coolness or this maybe detached quality to the song, almost maybe depersonalized or observational. And it's so focused, right? It's minimal, but speaks multitudes in its simplicity and the directness, which at the time was not like Tori. The lyrics are enigmatic, yes, but emotionally and compositionally, it's very direct. It's very straightforward, even though it's maybe more abstract than her other compositions up until then. I felt like it was a very atypical thing. And again, I'm going back to that moment where I first heard it. And for me, the real first listen of Choirgirl was not Spark, but hearing Cruel for the first time. for the very first time at this record store and just really thinking, like, wow, this is very, very different from what she's been doing. So from Cruel into Cocaine, She's Your Cocaine, where you're going to meet the Prince of Darkness. You're not impressed when you figure out who he really is, which is a small person. You're unsure if you're disappointed in him or in yourself. So I remember the Rolling Stone review for this, and I'm paraphrasing, said that this track seemed like Tori and her boys were like the hardest working band on Mars or something to that effect. And I think that that's really on point. I think and because of that, I immediately think of like the Creature Cantina band in Star Wars. And that kind of
does have an alien kind of vibe to it. It feels spacey, sort of. Yeah.
Yeah, so I really liked that description by Rolling Stone. Again, I'm paraphrasing. So from there, we go into Northern Lad. To me, that song sort of represents pulling yourself out of the whirlpool. The lyric, "If you could see me now," I think is a real, it really hits home, right? Who doesn't want someone to see either how well they're doing or how badly they're doing, depending on what the need is there. But that yearning, or to
be thinking about them, right?
To be like thinking about them,
you want to be thought about,
right? No matter if it's bad or good. So, and then I mean, it's time to turn the page when you're only wet because of the rain. What a shocking lyric, right? But relatable on so many levels. I remember hearing that, and I was just like, oh my god, she said fucking. She's talking about being wet like the rain. No. So. But I think it really does the song speaks to the power of change, the power that we have to change ourselves physically, mentally, spiritually, again and again, having infinite potential. I know it's corny, but that's sort of what I see in the song. And the song, it has, I wouldn't call it corny, but I would call it maybe more straightforward in terms of composition. But I think it's really interesting to talk about the power of choice, the choices that we make. And I think that with this song and the album overall, it asks us to pay a little bit closer attention to those choices and reflect on them a little bit more, but to keep swimming. So then after Northern Lad, we're going to feast at the banquet of life with Raspberry Swirl. No further explanation needed there. From Raspberry Swirl, it's hotel. So you're checking into the hotel beneath ground. Again, the sentiment, "You were wild, where are you now?" I think is one that carries a punch as you get older and as you ditch influences or behaviors or things that were really bad for you, whether that's people, whether that's addictions, whether that's whatever. So the end of that song, "I'm still alive, I'm still alive," the way that's just so urgent and so haunting, it sort of reminded me that I could read this song a little bit about having PTSD.
Totally.
And then continuing that thread, we would go into Black Dove, which I think definitely continues that storyline of PTSD. They don't know you've already lived on the other side of the galaxy. So, you never know when you meet somebody, what they're going through, what they've been through, what their experiences are. You don't know, what they're coming to the table with. So if you're the one carrying the trauma, it can be really hard to remember that. And when you're dealing with PTSD, it's a challenge. From there, we go into Playboy Mommy. In the same place that it was on the record, which, I don't really like to do, but I think it really fits there. I considered it as a closer, but I avoided it because I thought I can't be like the map inside. And then the closing track for me is Jackie's Strength. Which I had cut until Joseph sent a text a few days ago reminding me how perfect and cinematic it was, so I don't know if that was a calculated move on his part, an intuitive move knowing that I might cut
Maybe.
it. But I re-listened to it because of that text, and I thought I was having a lot of trouble placing it within the story. And then I thought, I think this is a good closer because, as you guys know, I've been trying with these playlists to end on not such a dark or depressing note because we go to some very dark and depressing territory during these playlists. And I thought that this was good. I mean, Jackie's Strength does have an edge to it. It does have its own darkness. It represents hope and is refracted through the lens of a generation of women who were put on Valium, kept silent, forgotten, women who were persevered and were valiant in their quietness. And they still wielded power, but their voices were shut up by patriarchy and generations of men who were afraid of women. And I think of my grandmother. I think of my grandma who was, she had a 4th grade education, was from the hills of Kentucky, and deeply, deeply Pentecostal, deeply religious. She was put on Valium in I think the 1950s, and remained on it for 30 years. I want to say she got off of it in 1980. So I remember it was so sad, and I hope my mom doesn't mind me saying this stuff, but I remember just feeling so bad for my mom because she said that she never really met her mother until her mom got off of Valium.
Yes.
And and when you asked her how she did it, she said, Jesus.
It was like cold turkey too, right? Like
Cold
one
turkey.
day.
There was no rehab.
Wow.
There was no treatment. There was no detox.
Wow.
Jesus.
Wow.
I mean, like, that's
Jesus
powerful. And this is the generation of woman that Tori evokes in the Jackie Strength video, right?
Yeah.
And I think Tori really has an intimate familiarity with that sort of generation of women who were, raised in the church and put on pills and told to shut up,
Yeah.
So that's my ending, and I like the
Incredible.
flow of this playlist a lot. I did not cut anything, and I did not add anything.
Yeah.
Nice work.
Okay. Okay. You didn't add anything. Can you say a little bit why you didn't add anything?
Sure can. Yep.
Okay,
I had, so there were versions of this playlist where I did have Cooling on the playlist, and I also had Merman on the playlist, and it just didn't feel right. The songs, Cooling less so than Merman. Merman for me was a little too gentle, and I didn't think that thread necessarily fit in my playlist. Cooling thematically, I could make a case for, but I deliberately made that. I made the choice to keep that one off because I think that song is about a kind of loss that I'm not familiar with, and that's not the story that I was telling on my playlist. So even though I love it, I think it's beautiful, it didn't relate to what I was telling story-wise. And that to me is this a story of, again, drowning, but finding a way to push up and get back up and resurface for air. So that was what I was going for. Originally, I did want to start my playlist with Cooling, so I'm interested to see if one of you did
Really?
that.
Oh,
so
wow.
who is messing with
Cooling
the master
is-
next?
Interesting.
I don't know, but I feel bad for Cooling because she was kicked off of a list she wasn't even supposed to be on. She's always a bridesmaid, never a bride. Poor Cooling.
Poor Cooling.
I see the problem
Maddie,
now. Like
I know.
Tori had a
Yeah,
hard
yeah.
time. She had a hard time with it, and I did
get it.
too. I don't love it any
Well,
less.
I've speaking about cinematic stuff, I have the Myth of Tori open right now, and it's on the Black
Ooh.
Dove page. And did you know that Tori had her engineers watch and rewatch the movie Fargo so they could understand the sound she was going for with Black Dove?
Oh my god.
Isn't that interesting? She made them listen to Fargo. Probably to get that icy thing in the verses, right? And also to touch on Jackie's strength really quickly, part of the reason I sent that message to you, and I noticed, and I talked about it being cinematic, is because, you know, Jackie is one of those songs that over time has just become something that people just don't really I mean, everybody loves what they love, but I think that Jackie has become sort of sanitized in the time past Choirgirl, to some degree. But the album version is so perfect, and part of what makes it so perfect, it's got edge, like Matt says, but part of it is Caden's guitar, that's sort of like radio frequency, like staticky thing that's happening, like there's a news report coming or something, right? That like very specific kind of like, it just gives an urgency that lives beneath it, that makes it, that's what gives it the edge to some degree. And you know that it's so because on Tales of a Librarian they removed the guitar and it's just all strings, and it does not sound, it's not the anywhere same. Near, it's not the same song at all. It loses that urgency, that darkness, that depth, and it just becomes pretty. And it's amazing how one layer removed can actually jeopardize the whole structure. That's not always true for Tori. Tori is so strong, and the song is strong, but there's something about the loss of that guitar, because it's doing something so special. It's one of those moments where I'm certain that Steve Caden like insisted, like, no, you have to put me on this. I mean, there's even drums on Jackie's Strength. They're soft, but the drums are even there. Like, there's an insistence on the full band sound throughout. Is it okay if I mess next?
Go with
since I'm chatting about it. First, I just want to say that Matt, you just did a beautiful job describing and talking about the songs. So you've done a lot of the work for me in terms of like not having to sort of dig into like what the songs themes are, but the topic, I think you actually said a lot of what I would have said. So thank you. That was really great. For me, so it's got a not so shocking inclusion and maybe a surprising cut.
Okay.
So my Choirgirl starts with Liquid Diamonds.
Okay.
That is the opener of I had never thought about it as an opener before. It's kind of a perfect opener. It fades us in. It lulls us into this band sound. Surrender, then start your engines. You'll know quite soon what my mistake was. It is the start of a great novel. Like, what a great line. Surrender, then start your engines. You'll know quite soon what my mistake was. And it does this interesting thing where, like, the vocal effect is sort of, like, muted and then open, muted and open. And I think it's that thing about the water. She's underwater, she's above water, she's underwater, she's above water, right? There's this thing happening. And because the ending talks about Daddy preaching to himself, there are no official lyrics to it. I choose to believe that she's saying, Connie, bring me those jeans, because she has a friend named Connie who she references when she sings a circle game later on the original bootleg. Maybe it's Kenny, bring me those jeans, but I like to think it's Connie. I like to think that
I've always thought it was Connie.
Right? Like, because she talks about the lilac mess in your prom dress.
Yeah.
And there's this sort of like setting up a memoir or something in that song that's really interesting to me. And we go from Liquid Diamonds into Jackie's Strength, because she is now telling a story where we've gone from the past and we're moving closer to the future, and she's thinking about her wedding day. She's thinking about the insecurities that build up to for women in particular, the expectation of what it means to be a woman and to live a domestic life and to be a wife and to be a mother. And the fact that within that song, she's singing of black magic, like it's such an interesting juxtaposition in this really, this song that's just sort of covered in lace, because it's a wedding day. It's getting lost on your wedding day, right? Like running away from it. It's such an interesting whirlpool of emotion that she's in with that song. But we go from Jackie's strength to spark, because now we have a hard cut into tragedy, into loss, into that self-doubt that she was making peace with, and Jackie's strength is just crushing her. It's drowning her, right? It's overwhelming her, because she's doubting if there's a woman in there somewhere. She can't keep a baby alive. Thinking about, you thought you were the bomb. Well, so did I. Just this like really intense, self, like scraping of the soul, like why can't I do this? It's so intense. It's also kind of triumphant, Spark, right? Like it's got this like lift and fall that is just really emblematic of Tori songs, and particularly this album. This album does those dynamic shifts so beautifully. And then after Spark, we go to IIE, where it's the relationship falling apart. So we have Jackie, where there's a marriage. We have Spark, where there's a miscarriage. We have IIE, where there's the disintegration. We not only have lost this thing that we created together, but we're dying here. There's no sign of a parachute. In this chapel of love, can we get a little grace, grace and elegance? We can't. We scream in cathedrals. Why can't it be beautiful? Why does there got to be a sacrifice, right? And there's no happy resolution there. It is just disintegration, and so beautiful. And I actually thought I had a version where I opened with IIE, Matt, and did sort of some of the same things that you did with dynamics. And I love all the reasons why you started with IIE, but the story that I was finding that she might be telling with these songs, it made sense there. After IE is Northern Lad, because now the relationship is over, and there's that yearning, there's that longing, wishing to be seen, wanting to see, like you said so beautifully, whether it's because you're doing well or you're doing terribly, you want them to see you, right? And after Northern Lad comes Playboy Mommy, because she has to make peace with the relationship ending, but also peace with the loss that she is not quite able to do in Spark. It takes some time to get there. And Playboy Mommy is one of those songs that I always felt connected to and loved, but didn't fully understand until I was in, my late 30s, and my husband and I had a stillbirth during our surrogacy process, and I understood IIE, I understood Spark. Even though I'm not a woman, I understood that loss, Playboy Mommy, and it was one of those things where I always knew in my soul that someday, someday this pain will be useful to you. Like someday this Tori album will be useful to you. I just knew it in my heart. Like someday I'll get this. I get it now. I feel it, but I don't relate to it yet. And not that you want to relate to it in those ways. You don't know that you're going to relate to it in those ways. Same with Northern Lad, right? Same with just this. That's one of those things about this record that's just it's there in advance for when we need it, right? Mark Doty, the poet, and says in one of his essays that I teach my students that our metaphors go on ahead of us. They know before we do. And I always think about that in relationship to Tori saying, maybe my wish knew better than I did. This sort of idea that there's something preordained, there's something predestined that's waiting for you, that knows before you do. And so I feel that way about a lot of these songs. And so after Playboy Mommy, we have Cooling. The center, it's the centerpiece of the record. We have this solo moment, and it's really... Cooling makes so much sense after Playboy Mommy. Maybe I didn't like to hear, but I still can't believe Speed Racer is dead. And Speed Racer could be the child that she lost. It could be the relationship that's gone. It's nostalgia. It's the Jackie Strength childhood thread, right? It's the ending of Liquid Diamonds. There is something that happens in Cooling that pulls from the past and looks to the future, but ultimately says, woman, you have too many brambles hiding under these bushes, right? I'm always good for a storm. There's an acceptance of who she is that she can't quite move past, and it means losing what she wants and who she wants, but there's a melancholy but a determination that she ultimately has to live with herself and is not going to give that self up, you know? When she says, "Is your place in heaven worth giving up these kisses?" It's like, I'm not like, are you sure? Like, I'm not going to change. This is who I am, but are you sure that you want to give this up for that? It's just it's such an incredible song. And I wrestled with whether this would be saved for the Boys for Pele double album extravaganza that'll happen in a few weeks.
Oh, yes.
But I don't believe this is a recording from Boys for Pele. I think she wrote the lyrics during Boys for Pele. This sounds like a choir girl song. Her voice, the huskiness, there's something about, and that could just be production, but I believe that she recorded this during these sessions. I firmly believe that in my bones, until she tells me otherwise. Matt, you can text her later and ask. So after Cooling comes Cruel, because the work isn't done. You start and stop, you go back, you go forward, you go farther. And so from Cooling to Cruel, trust me, listen to Play by Mommy, Cooling, and Cruel in sequence, and you'll feel it. And it's that detachment, that depersonalization that you're talking about, Matt. That's sort of like we heal in stages. It's a ongoing thing. And in Cruel, she's choosing to not feel okay. She's choosing to be cruel, doesn't know why, choosing to sit in the pain that she's feeling, but also sit in the pain that she's going to inflict. And I think that that's a really important distinction, that she holds space for both, that I'm going to experience this cruelty, but I'm going to inflict it as well. And I'm not going to try to figure out why or give you an answer for it, because it's not clear, and it doesn't have to be. And then after Cruel, she's your cocaine, because she is in this dom top, she is angry, right? You said it so beautifully. You meet the Prince of Darkness, and he's not that impressive. He's Squire of Dimness, right? Bring your sister if you can handle it, right? Like, just this, it's so gritty, it's so sexy and mean spirited, and the ending is just so I know it feels like out of a Tarantino film or something. Like, it's such a strange moment. It's erotic and vicious. And so from She's Your Cocaine, we go to Raspberry Swirl, because she's still in that space, right? But it's becoming a little more harmonious. It's becoming a little more friendly and playful. Like, she's worked through that Cruel She's Your Cocaine and gotten to the Raspberry Swirl, the sort of confidence in the sexuality and the playfulness, but also the, if you want this, you better do this, right? Like, there's a confidence there that she has finally reached. But with every climb, every ascension, you then drop, because that's just the way it is. And we go from Raspberry Swirl to Black Dove, because she is sort of taking in the totality of everything that's come before it. She's small again, right? She's a lion's become a mouse. She has shrunk, and she has to get to Texas. She has to give away her blue dress, right? Those explosions of sound, that sort of forward movement. There's sort of a closing in and making the self small, and then opening the self up to be very big and bold, and closing again, that happens on that song. And we go from Black Dove to the last song on the record, which is Hotel. And it is everything about the record in terms of its sound, in terms of its experimentation, its innovation, its composition. It's got not conventional, but it's got like organic, acoustic-ish moments blended in with this just tight, really epic and strange, sounds that just don't exist in nature or in that song. And Exit 75, I'm still alive. So of course you'll note that I shockingly had to cut Pandora.
What's wrong with you?
Just didn't. Pandora just did not Pandora, when I reordered, Pandora gives me what Liquid Diamonds gives me, but I think Liquid Diamonds gives it to me better. I mean, Pandora has a great ending, and I love it, but it has sort of B-side energy to me, and always kind of has. I've never really necessarily connected to it. I like it a lot. I think it's a beautiful song. It's a great song. I like hearing it live. I know this is controversial, but when you listen to it and then listen to Liquid Diamonds, they're the only two songs that sort of echo each other in this sort of bluesy way. And on a record this tight, this short, I don't think there's space for two Sonic sisters like that. Like, it's an balloons again. It's an album that thrives on contrast and thrives on surprise and pivots. And so to have two that are that close, it's kind of also the reason why I ultimately did not put Purple People back in, because that felt like it also belongs in the Liquid Diamonds, right?
Same, Joey.
Pandora. So I did not expect to cut it, but once I decided, right, they're sisters.
Those three, they're very the cadence is very similar.
Yeah,
and I think for me, Purple People was the least important of that trio. There was a moment where I was playing around with my track listing, and I had Liquid Diamonds and Pandora on back to back, and I was listening to it while I was doing other things, and I was like, oh, the song's really long. Oh wait, it's two songs. And I thought the exact same thing. They do have that very, very similar sway to them. It's almost like a little bit of a deconstructed jazz band feel.
Yeah. And I think that Liquid Diamonds does more of, it honors that experimental undercurrent that exists on all the other songs in a way that Pandora doesn't. That's not a knock on Pandora, but for me, Pandora could be on that first single with Purple People and Bachelorette, or, like it feels like part of that McThirsty's Lounge or whatever she called it, right?
Oh my God.
Yeah. Anyway, so that is my Choir Girl. It was very difficult. And again, it's difficult because I think that she got it really right with the finished product. So it feels really, really tricky to do this work. But I really like the way this sounds together, and I'm very, very into this track listing. I think it offers something different.
I think it's really strong. I wanted. Oh, sorry, Kristen. Go ahead.
I was just thinking about all the hate Joseph is going to get online for cutting Pandora, but that's okay. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, and maybe this will save you from getting some of the hate online, but thank you for sharing the story about what you and Alex went through and how that's sort of changed or influenced your perception of the record much later in life. I think that's really interesting to go back to music that's really important to you, whether it's as a comfort or whether it's to understand something that's unexplainable. I think that's what I was hinting at earlier when I said, I'd have no kids. I know your children, and that's all the children I need in my life. So I think that energy, it must be a real challenge to confront that in the music that you love the most after something traumatic has happened. Yeah. But thank you for sharing.
Yes, Joseph.
Of course, thank you, and thank you for sharing about your friend who's not with us anymore. We can dedicate the Choir Girl podcast episode to all the souls that we don't have who remind us of this music, and right. Yeah. All right, Kristen, mess us out. Let's go.
All right.
Yeah, take us home.
Let's go, baby. I do think that my podcast offers something similar yet different. Or my playlist, sorry.
She's doing the NPR voice. Uh-oh.
Well.
Delicious. Did you write a paper about this in France?
I did not write a fucking paper about this. Thank you very much. Anyway, look at that motherfucker. Anyway. No, I went to the source. I went to the woman, Tori Ellen herself. I went to the woman we called Tori. I went to the EPK. I went to performances. I went to, yes, Ed, thank you, Jason. And I just went to the source because I think when I think of this album, that what Tori said about, kind of dancing with darkness, that is real on this album. That comes through. And I think that's like a very evolved thing to want to have happen when you've had something bad happen to you, or a loss, or just like a shitty fucking day or whatever. But bitch really did put some sway into those hips. She really did. And it's magic, but it's also like, so it hurts you at the same time, you know?
Yeah.
So anyway, I went to the source, Storytellers, and so we're going to start with IIE. And
ladies.
I know. So a few reasons we're starting with IIE. One is I was like, what is my favorite fucking song on this album? What is the one song that if I open up this album on Spotify, if I'm not listening straight through, which I do, but if I'm not doing that, where do I go first? It is always IIE. And, you know, then Tori is talking about how she sees this vision. It's a little boy, and she's kind of chasing him down, and he's singing the song, IE, to her. And so he's basically going to put us in a trance, into like a dreamlike state, and we're going to enter this world. So IE first, and then second is going to be Black Dove. Black Dove is more of... It's kind of like when you like going into Alice in Wonderland, and it's fucking scary. It's like all those stupid ass fairy tales that my kids read still, and they're scary. They're cautionary tales, right? It's a nightmare in there. It looks like it's like Hansel and Gretel, but it's scary. Kind of like Strange Little Girls vibes, actually. The video of that. Anyway,
Yes, very much.
Yeah. So you're going into the woods, and it's fucking scary in there.
Yeah.
And you're like, is this real? Is this a dream? Is this a nightmare? So next you go to Playboy Mommy, because the nightmare is real and you have lost the baby. And the reason I put that first, or at least early on, is I think like it gave me more context for like the through lines of the pain and the discussions about loss in this way where, you know, Tori says like, you're not a mother, but you're not a mother. And you kind of live in this in-between world. I think she, you know, can hint at that. But when you're thinking about kind of like a through line story, putting it up front makes all of those other references to that pain and that loss and that longing and that not being good enough totally makes sense. So from Playboy Mommy, we go to Spark. I did kind of songs, and I called them like sister songs when I put them together. Like IE and Black Dove go together. Playboy Mommy and Spark go together. Spark, I like what you said, Joey, about needing more time from Playboy Mommy to Spark. I put them together for obvious reasons, but I think that's totally true. That acceptance, that those stages of grief, I don't think come that fast. But I think they go together thematically, of course.
Yeah.
And so then my next kind of set of sister songs is Cruel and Cocaine. And Cruel, simply, and Joey, you touched on this, where you're fucking mad at the world, right? And you're just like self-destructive, and you're angry, and you're a fucking asshole, and you just want to be angry, and maybe we're dying, and there's no help coming. It is the most. I can just imagine her recording that, and it would be amazing to see that, you know, to have a video of that. So Cruel and Cocaine, she's your cocaine. I wrote the bitch in Cruel is the same as the Squire of Dimness. So I think similar, like, you know, you are this person inflicting pain on yourself, and then you're also you're a person that is inflicting pain on other people.
So basically a hypocrite.
Right. And like, you know, she's kind of talked
Or a
about...
human being, Matt, a human being.
That's right. That is right. And she's talked about that character being shady as fuck. And I don't know if you guys remember this, but because I went to the source, she said that she had the source. I texted her and I asked her. Just kidding. I don't have the number. She
never will.
fall asleep and see what happens.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
So she said that she used to have to dress up to perform the songs, to record the songs. Like, this is proto ADP.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
she's been wanting to do that for a while. You're right.
Yeah. And there were just she says it multiple times within various interviews. And I can just totally see her pipping out to She's Your Cocaine.
I actually did see her pipping out to She's Your Cocaine, by the way, in Los Angeles very recently.
You literally did. Yeah.
A moment of silence.
I'm sorry, I'm triggered. Go on.
Yes, you did. Okay. So, from the next sister songs, we go to Raspberries Fall and Never Seen Blue. Mm-hmm. So, yeah.
Interesting.
So She's Your Cocaine. It's like this, like, release. She's blown her fucking lid, and she really does want to come back to being, like, an intimate, like, loving person, like the person that she knows that she is. And so she has this love with her female friends, and then she has Never Seen Blue, where she's met this guy, and he's challenged this difficult woman, the difficult woman of these previous songs, all the difficulty she's gone through and how she fights back against it. And he softens her with his blue eyes. So from there, our next two song sisters are Northern Lad and Jackie Strength. And so Northern Lad, obviously, she is losing him. It's not the right relationship, right? So we're losing him, and then within Jackie Strength, you only have yourself, right? I loved all the stuff that you talked about, Matt, with Jackie Strength and women of the time. And one of the things that I wanted to add is, like, also people were looking to Jackie Kennedy to, like, be this the sourse of strength when her husband was killed.
It's really fucked up.
Next to her.
Yeah.
And she did. And I think about my grandmother who lost a son in the early 80s to cancer, and I remember my aunt saying, oh, and she didn't even cry at his funeral. And it's, of course, we know because she was all cried out, you know, but like that being like something that to strive for, that you only have yourself and you have to present yourself a certain way. And so as opposed to like turning into a self-destructive puddle, you just turn into a wall of stone. Then we have our liquid mechanisms. There's so much water on here. Obviously, we know she wrote it by the water, but Pandora and Liquid Diamonds are together. And I wrote a mechanism for rebirth and to move us to the next part of the story.
So interesting that you had them together after the conversation that we had about, but that's because I think that you are so story based, and I think Matt and I do a little more like our ears are more interested in the transition of sound, right? But you are so invested in story, which I think is great. I think it's so interesting that we have these different approaches.
Yeah, that's what makes it fun, right? And like I think you're totally right. I hear everything that you're saying about the similarities and what Pandora does and what Liquid Diamonds do and how they're similar. Joey, I don't know if I remember this correctly, but I know for a long time, before we knew each other, when this album came out, Liquid Diamonds was one of my favorite songs for a really long time. I feel like it may have been one of yours too. But because of that, like you're right about what they bring to the table, but I see them as like totally different. Yes, like the water imagery is there. But yeah, anyway. So a lot of it was based on where Liquid Diamonds was going to go.
Sure.
I fucking love that song. Okay, so we've been taken through this nightmare, this loss, this possibly rebirth in the water. And the last two sister songs we're going to deliver up are Beulah Land and Hotel.
Ooh.
And Beulah Land, I've always really loved this song. Feels very Southern to me. I've known many an old lady named Beulah. It was on my short list for Ellis, but I love that name. My husband has a very difficult last name, as you know. Beulah just didn't sound good with it, but I just love it. But thinking about Beulah Land, like the story of Beulah Land being this place before heaven and the relationship between God and his people. And then also like Beulah being a girl's name. Like, do you go to that place and do you see that girl there? Like that little girl that you lost there?
Wow. I know.
Because
that's beautiful. I never thought about it that way.
Yeah. And it means married, which I didn't know. I've just always loved the name. But yeah, when I started thinking about it, I was like, what if that's like a land where the little girl is and she's there? And Hotel wakes us up and we're still alive. And was it a dream or was it a nightmare or was it real? You know, when you're in that dream state and you're about to die or something and you don't know if it's really happening or if it's a dream. In the end, she wakes up, exit 75, she's still alive. And that's her. So I didn't cut anything, and I just added Beulah and Never Seen Blue. And I did try to add Cooling, but she didn't fit any. I mean, she could have fit places, but I needed my duos. I needed all my song sisters. So there you have it.
Never Seen Blue is such a beautiful, romantic song to put on this album. Did you... it's so interesting to me that you put it on, especially in between Swirl and Northern Lad. Can you talk a little bit more about the placement of that one?
I think that Never Seen Blue. Well, first, there was something that you guys said in group chat recently where you said something where like, how are we going to put these B-sides on the album when the album is such like a perfect, like electronica, you know, poppin' fest. And I was like, similar to what you did, Matt, I did want to do a lot of like contrast and like juxtaposition between some of the sounds and then adding just some plain piano in, because I love Tori at the piano. When I think about my favorite Tori is definitely solo piano. That's clear when you look at my favorite songs. Never Seen Blue kind of does that thing for me that Peeping Tommy did on the other album as well. Just a moment of like real vulnerability. At like amid a bunch of like fronting like you're fucking tough, you know? Like you've been through hell and back. You know, could hold back a glacier. But like your soul was pierced by some boy's blue eyes. Like that's
I like
Tori
that.
Amos
Yeah.
to me. So that lives in that place for me. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
And there's something about Never Seen Blue. I think I said in the chat too that when I was thinking about those songs, we were debating, do these songs belong on the Pele episode?
Yeah.
Do they belong because those B-sides, you know, at least 3 of them are from the Boys for Pele period. And Never Seen Blue, there's something about it, even though it didn't make my list, there's something about it that feels, there's something in the delivery of it or the mood of it that feels a little more choir girl to me than Boys for Pele. So it makes sense that you put it on there. Like there's something that I can't quite articulate that feels of that world and of that space that she was in. Beulah Land maybe does too, but I don't know. Maybe because of the gospel choir, it feels more like it has, you know, roots for me in Pele proper.
Yeah.
But I'm with you. There's something about that. But I also am with Matt in the sense that, like, you know, it was really hard for me to put even one solo song on my choir girl track list because I feel like it's so resistant to that. Like she's being very, very purposeful. Like I said, with Jackie, like Jackie's got guitars, Jackie's got drums, Jackie got bass, like, and Jackie would be a solo song otherwise. Yeah, but you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like Jackie also does a really funny thing where there's sort of a very insistent like hammering of those first notes of the piano. Like, okay, here's some piano, but it's not actually going to be solo, right? Like there's almost like a joke in the beginning of Jackie, but the way she hits that note and the sound, right? Like,
you know what I've always imagined with Jackie and that piano is like typewriters, like when the news breaks and back in the day, typewriters, because the first few notes of the song are D-E-A-D, just by the way.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And so I've always imagined, music, so. I don't either, but I have, you know,
that's interesting.
this simple Tori Amos, the sad, simple Tori Amos piano book, which I still can't fucking play a single thing. And the notes are D-E-A-D, but they hammer it out like a typewriter.
Interesting.
So that's what I was going to imagine.
You know, these additional tracks on the singles, I started thinking could just make for a nice bonus record. You know, I think
totally.
we could give a shout out to Mainline Cherry, the remix of Spark, which is really good. And I flirted with trying to figure out how to get that onto my playlist. But, you know, I usually am, you know, the first one to add a bunch of shit onto any playlist. But this one, I really, truly could not. The Shady Feline mix of Cruel, the ambient Raspberry Swirl is great. The Silk Screen remix of Father Lucifer is great. And let's not also forget the great cover of Do It Again.
Of course.
Oh, yeah. I actually thought about Do It Again. I thought about, you know, because people do that, put a cover on the album, which is so not Tori Ellen to me.
Right.
But Do It Again is fucking incredible, y'all.
It's so good. How crazy that before we got the album, we got that British single that had Cooling, Do It Again. It was like, what is going on? Like we had Bachelorette, we had Purple People. Like, what a time to have all that music before we had the proper album. Like, wow.
I don't remember that because I don't think I don't know that I had that stuff beforehand. I don't think I heard that stuff first. I guess I wasn't as hardcore. Or maybe I just couldn't afford it because I was, you know, slinging pizza downtown Detroit.
It was hard to get those. Those Spark singles from the UK were like super limited. I don't know where I even ordered them from. Like,
you got it from that store from the England store.
No, it wasn't from them. There was like an online, like somebody had posted like, this is how you order it. Like, it was very, very complicated.
I don't remember how I got mine at all, but I do remember listening to it and my mom singing along to Do It Again. And I was
went to Bard. How sweet.
And then I went to Bard. But I was like, I don't know. I don't even know if Miss Judy reacted to how amazing Do It Again was, other than the fact that like it was a cover. Because I didn't know it was a cover when it started playing the first time.
It doesn't sound like the original. Like it's a real example of, you know, her, you know, totally reinventing. I mean, would love to get those Love is a Battlefield and like a Virgin covers from that same recording session, but you know,
we've asked her about that. We've asked her about that, Joey.
Yeah,
you did. I believe.
I sure did. She said that husband would pay dearly if he released them. Okay, guys, to wrap up, favorite moment on the record, which is such a cruel thing to do to us with this record, but what do we have for favorite moments?
Kristen, you can go ahead and go first.
Mine's easy. I know we're dying and there's no sign of a parachute. Chapel, Little Chapel, that part, that's my favorite. Easy, hands down, done. Next person.
Wow. Matt?
Okay. It's really, really hard. It's going to be the second verse of IIE, Just Say Yes, You Little Arsonist, when things just go kind of chaotic and aggressive, and it then sort of like you get that relief back with the chorus. If I had to have a second moment, I would say it would be Black Dove. I have to get to Texas because obviously my bestie lives in Texas, and I had the best year in Texas. So anytime I hear that, I think of my time in Texas or traveling to Texas, or, you know, this one. Joseph, tell us about your moment.
Well, so I think it's actually maybe it's too common, but I have to. It's too good not to. Also from Black Dove, that second bridge, The Other Side of the Galaxy, and just that incredible piano. And it's one of those that she must have improvised it, because I've heard Black Dove so many times over the years, and she cannot replicate the bridge. And it's a very rare, or she can, but it's too hard, and she's like, I'm not going to do that live. Like, it's just too much. So she has like a unit, like a very like simplified version of it that she does now. But on the record, wow, like what a moment. And I think it was one of those things where if you were somebody who was like stressed out about her piano and the presence of it on Choirgirl, and you got to Black Dove and then you heard that instrumental that bridges on the other side of the galaxy to I Have to Get to Texas, just that it's such an epic moment. It's so bombastic, it's so beautiful, it's bass heavy, it's fast, it's colorful. It's just like and we don't get, and generally speaking, like Tori, even less and less time has gone on, like to leave space for an instrumental bridge, like it wasn't really something that she maybe had, don't quote me, but maybe like not in that way since Cornflake Girl, right? Or like to have moments that are just like this focused burst of incredible composition without vocal on top of it is pretty rare. When you actually go back to the catalog, there's not that much of it. So it's a really special moment, just really incredible. And it gives it even more second to last song energy for my playlist when I think about sort of the dynamics and the explosion there. Yeah, I mean, this is a record full of moments. It's so good. And I have to second the bridge of IAE. Just everything about IAE is just, it's an incredible song. It's such a strange little treasure on a record full of them. So yeah, but we could probably do a 4-hour episode on this. We've reached almost 2, but we could really just, Choirgirl deserves, we might have to, who knows, maybe down the line we'll do revisits to see if our track listings still hold, or if we want to make some changes. There could be some bonus episodes down the road. But yeah.
All right. Let's go tuck you in, my little honey. I know it's night for you.
You're up late.
It is. It's 20 to midnight. I have to be up at 5 to go teach. And no, it is. This is a good way. I'm going to sleep soundly thinking about and hearing Choirgirl in my head. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Please subscribe, rate, review, give us some 5 stars, tell friends. We love the numbers. We want more. We want to get up. So
complete
keep listening,
whores.
spread the word. Complete whores. We're not profiting off of it. We just like to know that there are ears and eyes on us.
No money being made, only lost. It's for the craft. It's for the craft.
It's all for the craft. All right. I love you guys. I love this record. Thanks for listening,
See
everybody.
you next time. Bye.
Bye. IIE.
Sleep tight. Bye.